Imagine you are watching the biggest sporting event on Earth. 1 billion people are doing exactly the same thing, right now, at the same moment, in apartments in Tokyo, living rooms in Sao Paulo, bars in Lagos, squares in Paris. One planet, one game, one shared breath. It's the World Cup final, extra time. The score is 1-1. Berlin, July 9th, 2006. And the greatest player in the world, a man who had already announced this was his last game ever, is jogging across the pitch, shoulder to shoulder with an Italian defender. Then he stops. He turns around, and he puts his head directly into the Italian's chest. The Italian drops to the ground. The stadium goes silent for a full, confused second. The referee, who didn't even see it, has to be radioed by a fourth official sitting at a monitor. And just like that, the greatest player of his generation walks off the field and into history. Not for a goal, not for a trophy, for a headbutt. This is the story of the most controversial moment in World Cup history. And there's a lot more to it than you probably think. Part 1, the man. To understand what happened in Berlin in 2006, you have to understand who Zinedine Zidane actually was. Not the legend version, not the statue version, the real version. Zidane was born in 1972 in Marseille, France. His parents were Algerian immigrants, Berber in origin, from the Kabylie region. His father, Smile, worked as a night watchman. They lived in La Castellane, a housing project in the north of the city, a neighborhood known for poverty, drugs, and the kind of football played in parking lots by kids who had nowhere better to be. This background is not a small detail. It's the whole story. Zidane grew up between two worlds. He was French enough to represent France. He was Algerian enough that certain people in France would always remind him of that. He was a Muslim by heritage, in a country that has spent decades arguing loudly about what it means to be French. And he carried all of that with him, quietly, onto every pitch he ever played on. On the pitch, Zidane was something genuinely unprecedented. Technically, he was near perfect. He had a first touch that made the ball obedient. He could read the geometry of the game 3 moves ahead. He scored goals that people still watch today just to confirm they happened. 2 headers in the 1998 World Cup final against Brazil. A left-footed volley for Real Madrid in the 2002 Champions League final that was voted the greatest goal in Champions League history. But here's the thing almost everyone skips over. Zidane had been sent off 14 times during his club career. 14, including a 10-day ban for headbutting a Hamburg player in 2000, and a red card against Saudi Arabia in France's very first game of the 1998 World Cup, the tournament he went on to win. Zidane was not a violent man, but he was a man with a very precise internal threshold, and when it was crossed, he responded physically. He always had. This was known, this was documented, and nobody talked about it much because the rest of the time he was a genius, and geniuses get their rough edges quietly filed away. Part 2, the tournament. By 2006, Zidane was 34 years old. In football terms, that is ancient. He had already retired from international football once, in 2004, after France were knocked out of Euro 2004 in the group stage. He came back in 2005 because France needed him to qualify for the World Cup. They barely made it. When the 2006 World Cup in Germany began, France were not considered favorites. They were seen as an aging squad held together by a player who should, technically, already be retired. What happened next was extraordinary. Zidane played the tournament of his life. At 34, he scored a penalty against Switzerland in the group stage. He set up a winner against Spain in the last 16. Against Brazil, the previous tournament's champions, he was simply the best player on the pitch in a game France won 1-0. Against Portugal in the semifinal, he converted another penalty. He was imperious. He was controlling. He looked, impossibly, like he was getting better as the tournament went on. France reached the final on the back of a man playing his farewell tour as if he had something to prove to everyone who had ever doubted him. He was awarded the Golden Ball, the award for best player of the tournament. He won it. After everything that happened, he still won it. Part 3, July 9th. The 2006 World Cup final was France against Italy. Berlin, the Olympiastadion, the stadium that hosted the 1936 Olympics under Hitler's gaze, now held one of the most watched sporting events in human history. Zidane had told the world this was his last game. He was walking away from football after this, whatever the result. In the 7th minute, he scored. A penalty, chipped with absolute audacity straight down the middle, what's called a panenka. The ball clipped the underside of the crossbar and dropped in. Italy's goalkeeper Buffon had dived. The sheer arrogance of the technique was a statement. 12 minutes later, Italy equalized. Marco Materazzi, the Italian central defender assigned by coach Marcello Lippi specifically to mark Zidane, powered home a header from a corner. 1-1. 90 minutes. 1-1. Extra time. And then the 110th minute. Zidane and Materazzi were jogging alongside each other as play moved away from them. Nobody was watching. The cameras were following the ball somewhere else. The referee was following the ball. The linesmen were following the ball. The coaches had no view. 1 billion people watching on television had no idea what was about to happen because the director hadn't cut to that part of the pitch. There were words, a few seconds of words, and then Zidane turned around and drove his forehead into Materazzi's chest. Materazzi went down like a man who hadn't seen a tram coming. Zidane stood over him for a moment, then he walked away. Here is something that genuinely almost never gets mentioned. Nobody in that stadium knew what had happened in real time. Not the fans, not the coaches, not the managers. The referee, Horacio Elizondo of Argentina, did not see it. He was following the ball. His 2 assistant referees did not see it. They were following the ball. The only person with any authority who saw what happened was the 4th official, Luis Medina Cantalejo of Spain, who happened to be watching a monitor at the side of the pitch. He radioed Elizondo through a headset, confirmed what he had seen, and Elizondo, who by then had noticed Materazzi lying on the ground, walked over to Zidane and showed him a straight red card. 1 billion people had watched something none of them could quite explain.